overload, stress, anxiety, burnout. Our guest today wants to help us understand these outcomes and see how they don't have to happen. You don't have to, you don't want to overdraft your checking account. And today we'll talk about how to avoid an emotional overdraft. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be with us in the future live on your favorite social media channel. You can find out when those are going to happen and how you can get involved by joining us on our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, just two of the social platforms that we live stream these on. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to learn more, get connected so you can join us in the future. Hope you'll do exactly that. Now, I want you to know that today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership: Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It's time to recognize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world that is more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective and set of tools to create great results for their organizations and team members. That's what Flexible Leadership provides you, and that's why I wrote it. You can learn more and order your copy now at remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. I hope you will do that. And then I hope you will stay right where you are as I bring in my guest, Andy Brown, who has, let me tell you a little bit about Andy before we dive in. He has over 30 years experience as an award-winning advisor and coach in people-based businesses. He's also a podcast host and the author of the Amazon #1 bestseller, The Emotional Overdraft: 10 Simple Changes for Balancing Business Success and Wellbeing. It's a book for entrepreneurs and leaders and founders that articulates the often overlooked mental and physical costs of leadership. If you're here, you've probably experienced some of those, which is why I have Andy with me. Andy, thanks for joining us. So glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. And to be on your podcast, I was listening to one a while ago with Stephen, forget his surname, and he was talking about the transforming stress into hardiness. I thought, that's my world. That this Kevin is in my world, and at that point, I thought, I'm excited to talk to you. And by the way, I'd recommend that podcast. It was a few ago now, but really enjoyable. So
We'll make sure
delighted to be here.
I'm glad to have you, and we'll make sure that I'm not 100% sure I remember either, but I'll make sure that we have that in the show notes for all of you so you can connect to that. So you've written this great book, which really is about this idea of an emotional overdraft. I want to get to that, but before we do that, I really want to just have you tell us a little bit more about the journey that gets you to this point. Because you've been in business, you've been advising leaders and all those sorts of things. How do you end up talking about this? And how do you end up writing a book about this?
Two very different questions in a way. I ended up here. I started off life as a researcher, paid my way through university doing that. And that led me into advertising and marketing. I ended up on the board of an advertising agency, set up my own business. I've sold 2 businesses, once quite successfully and once very not successfully. So I've experienced both sides of building and selling a business. I was on the board of the largest independent agency in the world for a while, which is called Essence, before it got bought out. And I've run my own businesses. So I've got a lot of experience running businesses, relatively small businesses, so sub 150 people typically. And I suppose it was 10 years ago, I was the MD, managing director of a business. And a coach friend of mine said, you could be doing consultancy rather than working one company at a time. You could work with a handful of companies, and then you kind of have more impact. And it sort of got in my head, and I thought about it over Christmas that year. And he introduced me to someone, and I ended up working for a consulting firm, a mergers and acquisitions consulting firm, which was fascinating, and I learned a lot. But M&A was primarily just about money. It was just about how quickly can we get this business to a sale, and how quickly can we turn that into fee. And that wasn't what I was there for, really. So I left 6 years ago, set up my own business, and I work with a handful of really great communications and research businesses to help them become more valuable. And maybe they'll sell, maybe they won't, maybe they'll acquire somebody else. Maybe they'll raise funds. Maybe it gives them options. But if you become a more valuable business, then you have choices. If you want to grow to sell, then you can find the markets moved around you. So my day job is advising companies on building a more successful and valuable business.
Okay,
So
so
that's how I got here. That's my sort of background, I suppose. But
right,
in terms of emotional overdraft,
exactly.
I, I I've been on boards since. I've run businesses, been a leader, owned businesses for, I don't know, maybe 35 since the 90s. Um, and I've been consulting with multiple businesses for the last 7 or 8 years. And what I was observing was, I've got a business degree. I've done all those things, the classical stuff. The control of a business was typically around what my clients now would call the financials. Every time we have a board meeting, we start with the financials. And what I realized was that the financials were actually the thing that we could measure. There were lots of things going on that we couldn't measure. But because it's difficult to measure, we don't talk
We
about them.
don't
So
talk about those. We
yeah,
talk
we
about the
talk
ones we
about,
can
you know, we
measure. Yeah.
we can talk about profitability, we can talk about revenue growth or decline, we can talk about staff churn, we can talk about retention rates, we can talk about utilization, all the stuff we talk about in a board meeting. But there's some other stuff going on in businesses which isn't easy to measure. And I started noticing it. And what it was what I now call an emotional overdraft. And I can get to why I called it that in the end. But this behavior, I summarize it by saying it's when people subsidize the success of their business at their own personal, mental, or physical cost. I'll say it again. So you're subsidizing the success of your business at your own mental or physical cost. And most people I say that to take a moment, take a beat, and then go, oh God, yeah. Yeah, I recognize that. I recognize that. I did some research, of course, because I'm a researcher by training. I spoke to more than 50 businesses, um, and all of them. Spoiler, sorry, if you're gonna buy the book, here's a spoiler alert. Everyone has an emotional overdraft. Thank you for that, Kevin. Um, to some extent or another, everyone has an emotional overdraft, and that's what I call this thing. So with an overdraft, financial overdraft, it gives you the capacity to go beyond the money you actually have for the short
For
term, for
short
short
term.
term, to do something that you might really need to do. So it might be to pay a big unexpected bill. It might be to because you haven't really budgeted very well that month or whatever. But you go into overdraft, you have the facility. It costs you a lot of money, and then you go back out of the facility because it's the stupidest borrowing you can have. You know, if it was longer term for a car, you'd get some sort of structured financing. You wouldn't buy a car on an overdraft, certainly in the long term. And an emotional overdraft is the same thing. You, I am absolutely not saying that we shouldn't be committed to our businesses, that we shouldn't go beyond, go above and beyond, work longer hours, be more committed, feel it more personally. All those things that I've done myself. But I am saying that if you stay in that state for any extended period of time, it's too expensive, either physically and or mentally. And where it can lead to is stress. It can lead to physical challenges, which you might not even recognize. You might even notice. It can have impacts on your family. It can have impacts on your community, your friends. It ripples out everywhere. So I thought it was a really good analogy for, we understand that an overdraft is a good and necessary thing sometimes, but we don't stay in it. And if you can go into your emotional overdraft, you can do what you need to do, really commit, double down, work the long hours, and then come out and pay it back. Rest, recover, be kind to yourself, be kind to those around you. then you've got a very sustainable business model. And this is leadership, or this is founders, leaders, entrepreneurs have a very similar mentality when it comes to this. I think the reality of emotional overdraft is that most of us behave like this anyway, whether we're running a business or not. There's a certain sense of self-sacrifice. And if you swap out subsidizing the success of your business with subsidizing the success of your operation or your enterprise, it could be someone running a family. I get mothers who read this book. I mean, this is the utter joy of having put this book into the world, is that some people read it. But I get people come back to me, and I know it's having an effect. But I had a mother recently come back to me, and she said, "I read my friends the first chapter, and they said, 'Who is this?' And they went, 'Oh, this is you. This is you.'" And she's not running a company. She's not a leader in the conventional sense, but she's a CEO of her family, and she felt she was constantly subsidizing everyone else's happiness and everyone else's success and her friends. It would always be her that put herself out to do the thing. And so she said it resonated with me. So I think it's a fairly universal thing. It's a very long answer to your question, so apologies to that. But that's where it came from.
I'm glad you brought that up, because you talked about, you work with founders, you work with entrepreneurs, and certainly that is a use for this. But this applies to all leaders, which is why you're here, because our audience is broad,
Totally.
and all those things, right? So in this, so I get books all the time, right? People are pitching us to be on the show, and so you look for patterns before you dive in and make decisions, right? And so I pick up the book, and it says Emotional Overdraft on an angle, which is cool. Changes for balancing business success and well-being. So the first thing that comes into my head is, this is a book about work-life balance. See, that's why I want to bring that up, because I want you, because you wrote this book, to talk to me about how you feel about that term, work-life balance.
I think you know how I feel about it.
Well, I've read the book, but
Yeah.
no one else listening has. So
No, not nobody else.
that's
Not
what
nobody
people are
else,
going to
Kevin.
read.
Maybe, but
That's
yes,
what
it's
people are
true.
going to read first, right? When
Yeah,
they see the
they
cover.
are, and I get it. I get it. It's a really helpful expression. Work-life balance is a really helpful expression in that it raises the issue of not being subsumed by your work. So in that sense, it's great. But it also sets up a dichotomy as a phrase. It suggests that work and life are separate things, and you either work or you live. And you almost can't wait for work to stop so you can carry on and do your life. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a leader, if you're anyone who's committed to their career, you work is just part of life. Work is part of that continuum. So if you call it work lifestyle balance, maybe that's getting closer to something that's more useful, because it's, am I balancing how I live and how I exist and my role in my community and my role in my family and everything else with my dedication and commitment to work? Then probably I buy that. But work-life balance, I just think, sets up for people like you and me, and for people listening who are really dedicated to what they do, they aren't separate things. So it's just not a helpful, or useful thing to describe. So that's my view on work-life balance. It's
And
but
let me just
but
add,
but but I also understand, my publisher would love me to put work-life balance on the front of it, and I refuse to do it, because it's a phrase that people do understand, and it's helpful, but it's helpful on the way to something, I think.
it's in here. It's just not what the book's about. And the thing that I will say too, because you've already hinted at this, is that I always talk about work-life balance is that people seem to think that there's a perfect place to be. And
Mm.
the reality is that we're all in seasons, whether it's seasons of life or it's seasons of the year, or, whatever, right? Like, okay, I've got a new book coming out in a few months. Few months now, by the time you might be reading this, it might be very soon. Like, where my focus is different than it might have been 7 months. Well, 7 months ago I was writing the book. But my point is that where we are in our life and in our work means that where we are on these things might be different. Your comment earlier, and we're going to get into this about the overdraft in a second, is that we might need to go to a different place for a while, but it's not sustainable. We can't stay there. And in that regard, if we think about work life balance that way, then it's helpful. But the way most think about it, to your point, well stated, it's less than helpful. It makes people think that there's a place they're supposed to get to, and they don't ever feel like they're getting there.
Yeah, because a balanced state is a healthy thing. You know, it's what you guys were wrestling for in your election recently. Is you know, it wasn't as simple as I prefer this person or that person. It was how do we find some balance in our politics that gives us the opportunity to succeed and to thrive. And we've just had an election in the UK as well in the summer, and it was exactly the same challenge. So
You
balance is
guys are
everything.
just smarter because you don't make it take as long or cost as much. I'm just going to say that about all that. So
Yeah,
let's just
yeah.
make
I
it
wasn't getting
safer
into
for
politics.
all of us and move on from there.
Mm.
Uh, so why it, and you've hinted at this already, but why do we do it? Like, why do we, as leaders, maybe more, but as leaders, to the point of the show, why do we go into overdraft? Why do we go to the perilous place?
And that's the question. So when I first wrote the book, I did the research, came up with the idea, wrote it, submitted to the publisher, and the publisher went, Andy, this is great. We think this is really interesting. Where's the rest of the book? And I said, well, what do you mean? Where's the rest of the book? And they said, well, okay, so we get the idea of overdraft, but what do we do about it? What do we do about the overdraft? So I had to write the second half of the book, which is, you may have come across, but I felt a bit foolish, but I share the story. Um, so why do we get into overdraft? What's at the risk of making this sound simple, and I think it is simple, but it's not easy. I think it is simple. Um, it's broadly because of habits. And what I've identified in the research for the book is there are broadly 10 areas or 10 habitual behaviors. I call them drivers, but they are 10 behaviors or habits, which to a greater extent affect all of us. And the profile is always different, but there's certainly this combination of 10 drivers. And we typically behave out of habit. And the good thing about habit is that we don't notice it. And the bad thing about habit is that we don't notice it. So it's good that it helps us do things without thinking,
Well,
um,
especially if they're good, they're useful and helpful things, right?
like breathing. You don't want to think about breathing all the time because that's not
And
it's
it
not
is a good
technically
business
habitual, but it's
decision, by the way,
reflex.
to keep breathing. We're just
That's
saying.
it's,
Uh,
that's my big conclusion in the book is keep breathing. Actually, it's not a bad thing to do with breathing exercises, but that's a different story. So, yeah, there are the broadly 10 behaviors, and they're universal to everybody. It's just the balance of those behaviors is different for almost everybody. And for example, um, a classic one is what I call JFDI, which the publisher insists I call just flipping do it. Is a JFDI behavior is if you're a doer, I just get things done. I get things. I'm one of those people. I get things done. That's why I'm a leader. I pile in. I lead from the front. I make things happen. I get things done.
I'm not afraid to roll up my sleeves. I'm ready to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's great. And that's what's interesting about all these behaviors. On one, like a SWOT analysis that when you did at college, every strength is a weakness, every opportunity is a threat. This is the problem. But it's not a bad thing to be a doer. But when that doing mentality means that there's a problem in your organization or your team, and the answer is you jump in and fix it, or you always have to get involved, or you're the person that likes to lead from the front and show people how to do it, and then you kind of hang around. This is the sort of behavior that then, well, what happens? I'll tell you what happens if you're a doer. You've got a team, and they will try and solve a problem, and you'll jump in and go, like, let's do it this way and let's do that way. And I wouldn't do that. I'd do this. And you come in and tell them how to do it. And the team go, oh, okay, well, Andy's going to come and fix that. So we'll let Andy get on with it. And if you keep doing that, what happens is that team, there's no such thing as bad dogs, just bad owners. You teach your team to expect you to jump in and help.
Yeah.
And what happens is that over time, they'll go, well, I'm a bit less engaged. I'm a bit less I know Andy's going to jump in anyway, so I'm not going to commit as much effort to this. It'll be wrong anyway because he's always got the answer. So he's going to jump in. I'll just do a sort of draft, and then Andy can fix it. And one day you'll wake up
Apparently,
as a
that's what
leader.
Andy wants. So I'm
Yeah,
just
well,
doing
because
I'm
he
just
keeps
playing the game as it's been designed. Whether I like it
precisely.
or not, that's the game. That's the way we play.
And then I wake up one morning and I've got a team of people who are disengaged, unmotivated, who do bad work. And I'm thinking, how come I'm the only person in this company who is interested in standards, who's doing good work, who's having good decisions, who's originating ideas? How come I'm the only one? Well, because Andy, I don't know how I ended up talking about myself. I should have used Kevin. But how come that's happened? Well, I've spent years probably teaching that team to respond that way. And what happens is that they're sitting back, they're less engaged, they make less progress, there's fewer promotions. There's a very long cycle of behaviors that follow on behind that. But what we do know is that you are going to have to spend more time. You're going to be dragged into more things. You're going to feel you have to do more. And then other behaviors start to come into play, like trust is a big one. So very aligned with JFDI is the trust behavior. It's great to trust people. It's great to trust your team. And you should do that, but lots and lots of leaders struggle to trust their team. And imagine you've just been doing all this JFDI behavior, and now I've started to doubt my team a bit. Did I recruit good people or not? How did these people get through the recruitment process? These people are pretty bang average. What's happened to them? Well, I don't quite trust them anymore. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start hiring some other people. Maybe I'm going to find other teams. I'm going to stop giving them work. They become demotivated. They might leave. They might look for more fulfilling work. And so trust, and that reinforces my feeling about trust, because I go, well, I was right not to trust them. And I've been in so many companies, particularly working with smaller companies where the leadership kind of know everybody, or 70, 80, 90, 100 and up to mid hundreds. You kind of know who everybody is. And the solution, what you spot the behavior, it ends up with them sacking people. They release people, and they say, it's a shame you didn't quite work out. You've been here 2 or 3 years. We thought you were going to be great. Didn't really work for us. Best for all of us if you go. But thanks a lot, and good luck in your career. And it keeps happening. And that's one of the really clear signals that either you're recruiting very badly, but probably the sum of that, because everyone does, but not everyone, almost everyone does, or you're doing something to turn people from good people into less good people. And always in my career, I've hired for attitude. I always think you hire for attitude. You can't teach attitude. So hire people with amazing attitudes, and you can teach them what you need to teach them. But even then, I found myself, because I'm not immune from this, believe me, um, I found that I've hired people with great attitudes who over time have just kind of become disengaged, become less than I thought they would. And I absolutely know that's down to me. I had a member of staff, an amazing, bright lady who's gone on to do incredible things. And she once said to me in a meeting, she said, and I was MD at the time, she said, Andy, one day you'll make a really good MD. And I thought, well, I am the MD. I've been an MD for about 15 years. What are you talking about? But her point was that I thought I was doing all the right things. There's a brilliant book called The Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. There you go. Liz Wiseman and the Australian chap whose name I forget, but Multipliers, fantastic book. And I thought I was a multiplier. I thought I was helping my team by doing all the right things. But it turns out I was what Liz calls an accidental diminisher. I was actually doing all the right things, but it wasn't landing as well as I thought. And it's a very small difference, but it can have a huge impact on your people. And that's what she meant. And she bought me the book and gave it to me, which is such a kind and considerate. I mean, clearly she thought I was a good leader, but she didn't think I was having the impact I should be having. And she cared enough to buy me this book, which is an outstanding book.
It is, and Liz has been on the show. We'll make sure that everybody
I
is in
haven't seen
the
seen
show
that one.
notes as
I'd
well.
dig that
So
out. Liz Wiseman's outstanding. I mean, to be on the same podcast she's been on. Hello, Turf.
there you go. Well, thank you, I guess. So here's the thing. There are 10 drivers. We do not have time to talk about all 10. We have talked about 2. We've talked about JFDI, which when I took your assessment, and we'll tell people how they can get to your assessment in a little bit, that came out as my highest or worst one. I don't think in my case, it's always, and maybe this is just Kevin justifying, that it's always that I feel like I have to, but I feel like I want to. It is also partly about related to, for me, like, and in fact, if it's not a huge problem for me, at least in terms of the engagement of my team, it's because I think I'm really good, and your assessment says I'm in good shape on the trust one. So I balance that one. But here's the one that I think there's that, or at least for Kevin, sees a connection to JFDI, and that's urgency,
Mm.
right? I'm doing it to be helpful, and I'm doing it just because we just need to keep moving. And so talk about this urge again. We can't get to all of them.
Yeah.
So
Well, someone's written a book about
what
this, so
about
that
the
you
driver
want
of
the details.
urgency? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say someone's written a book with all the 10 things in it, so if you're interested, you can always grab a copy of that. Thank you, Kevin.
Here it is, Emotional Overdraft by Andy Brown. That's who we're
The one
talking
and
to.
only.
So talk about this
Um,
driver of urgency.
so urgency is really interesting, and in the research, it showed up as things like the comments would be. I asked people why they ended up in this state, and they said things like, "Well, with short of time, I was acting on reflex. I wasn't thinking. I just jump in and sort of get it done. So it feels important. It's very highly related to JFDI, and that's the other thing is I've artificially created the distinctions, but they blur. They edge into each other a little bit. Um, and urgency is really useful. And if you're a team leader and you want to get things done and you're encouraging your team to do things really quickly, it's great. I mean, that's a really good thing at times.
Until it's
Like
not, like in every one
and,
of these.
and, and
It's
then
really
until
good
it
until
isn't
it's not,
exactly.
right?
And what's interesting is that I look at urgency and go, well, why is it urgent? What has made this urgent? It's a bit one of the big drivers, and lots of people have it. So the question to ask yourself, if you keep finding yourself in urgent situations where you have to jump in, you feel like you don't have a choice other than for you to get involved. And remember, if you're getting involved, that means that you're not doing the things on your to-do list. You're not doing the important stuff of leadership. You're not developing your teams. All that stuff that can wait, that doesn't seem to matter, will wait. So urgency is really important to understand. But if you find you're in urgent situations, ask yourself the question, why is this urgent? What has made this become urgent? And if you do that and you're honest about it, what you might discover is that it could actually be something you could have anticipated. And so I talk to people about this all the time, and they'll say, "Yeah, but what if my client phones up, our biggest client phones up in the morning? I've got my day plan. They phone up first thing in the morning. They say it's all gone wrong, Andy. We need to get it fixed." How could I have predicted that? That's urgent, and I couldn't have predicted it. Well, that's not really true, is it? Because unless that's the only time that's ever happened,
Yeah.
that isn't that's which is not never is. Then it's actually predictable. It's not predictable exactly when it's going to happen, but it is predictable that it will happen. And in my world, I'd say, and I've got to tell you, the answer to lots of emotional overdraft is really boring stuff. It's like process, it's it's organization, it's delegation, it's tracking and monitoring. These are things. But when you're in emotional overdraft, when you're absolutely, when you're stressed, when you're burning out, the last thing you feel you can do is stop and organize stuff. So I hope we can come back to that.
Well, let me just make an observation
Okay.
because it's an example in the book, and I won't go to it exactly, and I may not get it perfect, but but it rung true for me about urgency. We get in
Mm.
that moment. There's the fire. I need to go get the fire extinguisher right now. In the book, you talk about a client saying, "I need this on Monday," and they were getting ready to go away for the weekend.
Yeah.
And and if we don't stop, we just take the laptop and power through it. But if we do stop, we might ask the customer, "Hey, I'm about ready to go for the weekend. Is Monday would Tuesday work?"
And that's
And if
exactly what
they
happened.
say yes, awesome. If they say no, you still at least know, right? Or
And
they
that's
may
that.
say end of day Monday is fine, which is might be the same thing as Tuesday. So my
Mm.
point is, all we have to do is stop, take a breath,
Yeah.
and in many of these, because here's the thing, you said it earlier, and there's a chapter at the end about the habits here, right? Is if we don't stop and we run on automatic, we run on our habit, that's where we run the risk of any of these things, any of the 10 becoming an issue. But if we'll stop, take a breath and say, what if, or is this serving me or whatever, right?
Mhm.
So like Kevin, JFDI, well, let me just roll up my sleeves and help. Okay, is that serving the situation? Uh, is it even seen as helpful by the team, even if that's my entire intention?
Yep.
Maybe, maybe not. Maybe what they'd rather hear is, "Hey, I know you're really busy. What can I do for you? Do you want me to order the pizza?" Like maybe that's what they need. Right.
And you've nailed it. The secret and the reason emotional overdraft is so important as a phrase is because if you recognize that you are in those habits and you're in your emotional overdraft for too long, then take a second. Just take a second and go, what could I do differently? What could I do differently now? And that's often enough to break a habit. It's often enough to make you recognize, oh, okay. So when I go running 2 or 3 times a week, I have to put my trainers by the bedroom door. If I don't, I know that I'm gonna probably find an excuse. It's too wet, it's too cold, it's too sunny, it's too whatever, too Monday.
Well, wet and too wet and too cold is most likely where you live. I'm just going to say.
They are, yeah, but I wanted to put it out there. But if I put them by my bedroom door, I know that but that I do have to get in the habit of putting them by the bedroom door, so it reminds me to do
That's
it.
the habit. So that's well,
That's a
or I
good
would
habit. So
say,
that's how you flip it.
right. I would say that's the routine, that helps you reinforce the habit that you want.
And
So
there's loads of books about habit. And but I'll just finish that thing about the urgency because it's important. The first one was a true story. I had a head of a whole department, a brilliant, talented lady who came to me and said, I've got to cancel my holiday because I'm going to, for the third time, I think it was, because I've got to get this thing done on Monday. And I just said, have you asked the client if they really need it by Monday? Because we all go, client wants it, client gets it. Client wants it, client gets it. That's not always true because the client, often they bring you answers, not questions. And I often say to my teams, go and ask them a question. Go and find out what's behind what they're telling you because they're saying we need it by Monday as an answer to something. What actually did they need? She went back and chatted to them and said, "Look, I'm going on holiday this weekend. I can get it done by Monday, but if I go away, I can still get it done to you by Tuesday." And the client went, "Great, have a lovely weekend, have a great holiday."
and
You know,
and now
just for
I don't
asking. And that was the habit. That was the habit broken. She went, "I'll take a beat. I recognize what I'm doing. I'll actually ask the client." So it's so important. It gives you the chance to stop. But also on that urgency, I was talking about the one where a client asks you to do something really quickly. Actually, if that happens more than once, and it does happen more than once, there's probably something happening in the background that is leading to the client to asking for it. So it could be that every time a client asks for something, you guys say yes.
So
So the
why won't
client,
they stop asking?
why wouldn't they? They'll just keep taking. They'll keep taking. That's what clients do. That's almost the definition of them. So they're going to go, well, I expect it tomorrow. They're not going to say, well, maybe could you do it by the end of the week or could you do it in 2 weeks' time? Then they're not thinking about what you're doing. They're just going, well, they always get it to me by, in 24 hours. So I'll ask for it
Well, ask for
tomorrow.
24 hours.
So we've trained the client to expect that. So that's what I'm saying. Behind that urgency, as a leader, it's critical for me that you go, hang on, maybe the team have to respond really quickly on this occasion, but let's just step back and have a look at this and go, have we taught our client to behave that way? Or if it happens regularly, and so I used to have a business where we were a media agency, and we had to place ads on a particular day, and that day, you've got to place an ad on a Wednesday. It's got to appear on a Wednesday, and we get the ads supplied to us by a creative agency, and often they'd be very late. And my team were fantastic, and they would make up a day or two's shortfall, and they'd find a way to get those ads live. But occasionally it would go wrong, and the ads wouldn't show up, and then the client would give my team grief. And I said, have you ever told the client what the process is and why we say we need them 4 days before the media booking? And they said, no, we've never told them. And I said, why don't we, because we get lots of clients doing this, why don't we make a little animation that just explains it very simply? And then we can use that. And then we could say to them, and when your creative agency supplies with 2 days notice, and we need 4, we're not being difficult. There's these processes that have to
We're
happen.
trying to
There's
make sure
legal
we
and
can always
compliance.
make it happen. Is it
So
any
uh,
other?
And it changed. It changed the media buying department with the clients because suddenly their clients were educated to understand, all those emergencies slowed down. They'd start giving their creative agencies the pressure rather than my team the pressure. I mean, that was in a period when we doubled in size in 18 months. So we were under pressure anyway. We were doing amazing things. But that sort of thinking, so there's an urgency. It's urgent, but might it not have been as urgent if we'd done something else different? If we had better processes, if it's urgent because we made a mistake, could we have better quality assurance or checking? Or there's almost always something. So urgency, yes, it's great that you can jump in and fix it. It's great that you can do really well with it, but a lot of urgency can be mitigated by
and,
better planning
and
and
or
better
it's
organization,
self-created.
and it's
So
self-created.
we are talking with Andy Brown, the author of The Emotional Overdraft, and the richness that we've had in this conversation is just about a very small part of the book, which is why you make sure you go buy your copy. More about how to do that in a second. But I have a couple other questions, Andy, before we finish. And because here's the thing, normally the show is about 30 minutes. We're already over that. And
Sorry about that.
all that means is that this was a good conversation. But what it also means is that we're starting to dive into what other people might have said, hey, this is more time than I usually spend with Kevin. So I want to be aware of that. But I do have a couple of other questions before we go. Number one is, I want to know, Andy, what you do for fun. Because one of the things we need to do to get back out of our emotional overdraft is to make sure we're not missing on those things that bring us joy and rejuvenation. And so what are those things for you?
Well, I exercise well. I'm coming on
Three
my
days a
18th,
week
to
if
be
you
fair.
put the
So,
shoes out there. You already told us.
well, if I do, well, and I go to the gym 2 days a week as well. And my publisher's a really good example of this. She's run every day consecutively for over 6 years, and she does that by her definition of a run is anything 2 kilometers or more. So it doesn't have to be miles; it can just be a mile. But every day she's committed, and she was struggling originally to do it, and she changed her mindset and changed it from "I try to run every day" to "I am someone who runs every day." And she now recognizes herself as someone who runs every day.
I'm a runner.
And and that's not someone who tries to run every day, because if you try, you've got permission not to run. She is someone who runs every day, and she identifies with that. And I only share that because I do love running quite long distances. But if you're listening to this and going, "But Andy, I don't have time. I'm too busy." And I hear it all the time. I've stopped going to the gym. I don't play five-a-side anymore. I've stopped playing sports. These things are so easy to let go when you think you're busy. These are the things you have to plug into. The physicality. This morning was a beautiful sunny day in the UK. It's a rare thing, but a beautiful day. And I made time this morning. I moved a couple of things and I went for a walk. I love walking. I love walking quite long distances, rambling. Um, that's one of my big hobbies. The other thing is I support a football team. Football is actually football. I think you call it soccer. And I go and support them. And as a 59-year-old man, I can stand on a terrace with lots of other balding men and shout abuse at people I'll never see again in my life for 90 minutes. It's just an amazing release and a sense of community being in this. And I don't support a very good team. So there's always this shared sense of
Angst.
angst and depression and yeah, but it's a glorious thing, and it doesn't feel very grown up, and that's also probably a very good thing as well. So that's what I do but I make the time to do it. I plan it into my diary, and I make the time to do it.
We make choices and we make the choice to do that. And I don't have to run. I choose to run. I get to run. I'm a runner, right? I love
Mhm.
that. What are you reading? Or Andy, what's something that you've read recently?
I do read a lot, but right now I'm rereading a book which is called Connect by Carol Robin, and Connect is I think it's Harvard, but the Carol runs the most oversubscribed course on the Harvard MBA course, and it's known universally as the touchy feely course. And it's so there's the MBA and there's all that kind of serious. We talked about finances earlier and how you interpret P&L and all those things. But the touchy feely course is how do you connect with other people? And it is the single most oversubscribed. You have to justify getting onto that course. It's very hard to get onto. And Carol and her colleagues have written this book called Connect, and it's a series of stories they follow through the book. It's really beautifully written about how people connect with each other in a business setting. and it's so fascinating. And it's probably 3 or 4 years since I read it. So I pulled it. I was talking to someone the other day about it. I pulled it off the shelf, and it's by my bed right now. And it's a fabulous book. It's a book I wish I'd written. I mean, mine's okay. I'm really pleased with it, but yeah, it's a cracking book.
Well, that's high praise from any author for someone to say about the other person, man, I wish I'd written that. And there's some of those that I have read, and in some I've had the chance to tell those people those things. And so, Andy, we'll have that in the show notes, as well as
Right.
the podcasts
Yeah.
that we've mentioned throughout our conversation, et
It's
cetera.
actually weirdly Connect is a very good audio book. Sometimes business books, and I don't think mine's a business book. I think mine is a self-development book more than anything else, but it is about business. But this particular book works really well as an audio book. So if you feel you haven't got time to pick a book up and read it, give it a go on audio. Is really worth trying. It's a different way of consuming
Well,
intelligence.
and if people are listening to this podcast, they're already auditorily focused. So why not do that as well? We have been talking with you, Andy, and I'm going to hold up the book for those who are watching on video while you tell people where they can reach you. Where do you want to point people? And if they want a copy of the Emotional Overdraft, where do they go? Just I'll let you do that for a second right now.
Okay, I'm sure most people know where to buy a book. Amazon, of course, but local support your local bookstores if you can. They can definitely get hold of a copy. It's available universally, and the website's emotionaloverdraft.com. You can do the self-assessment yourself that we've been talking about. So you can do that. That's free of charge on there, and download your own results, which might be interesting. There's also my podcast, and I write lots of articles about this, and I speak to lots of people about it. You are not alone. Everyone deals with this to a greater or lesser extent. You can do something about it. You can reverse your emotional overdraft really quickly, but it takes some being deliberate. So take a pause, take a moment, reflect on emotional overdraft. And if the website helps, emotionaloverdraft.com, give it a try.
Hope you'll do that. And before we go, every episode, I ask you as a listener or viewer this question: now what? What action will you take as a result of this? And while that is always an important thing, I think from this particular conversation, there should be plenty for you to think about. And if all you got was that last point, which was take a breath and stop and think and make a conscious choice rather than leaning into or just relying on whatever your habits are doing to you, maybe in some cases, even if it's unintentional. But whatever it is that you took from this, my hope is that you will take action and not just listen and say, oh, that was pretty good. But rather you say, this is the Andy Brown of all the Andy Browns on the planet that I want to get to know better. I need to get a copy of their Emotional Overdraft. And if you found this useful, which I hope you did, I also hope that you will share it with someone else, that you will subscribe wherever you're getting this content from so you don't miss future episodes. Andy, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
You're welcome.
And everybody, you should subscribe and you should like it, depending on where you happen to be listening to it from, because we'll be back next week. And we hope that you'll be with us too for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.